All right, so hi everyone. Welcome to this ECR Network event, Media 101 for researchers. We're very glad to have this panel event for you because we recognize, and we know that you guys recognize, that media engagement is really important as part of your research career. It's not just enough to just generate data and write it up for your own little group. You have to now disseminate that information out to a broader audience. So today we've got a great panel of both ECRs and some of our more senior researchers who have been around a while, who have had some sort of media engagement, quite at different varying levels. And we introduced these people, we invited these people on the panel because they had such differing degrees of experience. So you can find out from them what's it like to engage with the media. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be monitoring the chat throughout and we will come back to them at the end. But I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for today, Angie Kelly, which we're very pleased to have on board. So Angie Kelly is the editor of the Lighthouse, and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more in your background, Angie, but welcome. Thank you everyone for attending as well.
Thanks very much for having me, everybody. I hope that Michael Yanakis and I and our fellow panelists can demystify the process a bit for you today about getting your research covered in the mainstream media and give you some tips and tricks on how all the different ways you can do that, and hopefully get some insights from people who are experienced in this on the good, bad and the ugly stories that they tell over their dinner parties and give you some advice on what not to say, what to say, and some advice from their war stories. First, a little bit about me. I have spent 25 years in newspapers, and the last 15 of those were at Fairfax, editing various sections, everything from special reports to education to property, and from the Don't Hate Me files, 5 years as the travel editor. And the first 10 years of my career were as a general reporter at the Daily Telegraph, so I cut my teeth on police reporting. I had 2 years as the health writer, and all kinds of hard news of the day. I spent 2 years at UCID in their media department, and I also spent 2 years in the Department of Health media department in New South Wales. So I've seen this from both sides of the fence, from the PR disseminating a message point of view and highlighting messages of public health to actually writing the research up for newspapers. I came here in 2017 and it took me 10 months to launch the Lighthouse in April 2018. And I'm really proud to say that most of the academics I've met in that nearly 3 years have been excited to engage with the Lighthouse. And we're up to nearly 500 stories. By the end of this week, we will have published 500 stories. And this year particularly proved to be an opportunity for an array of expertise to be published during the COVID crisis. We were able to show Macquarie expertise in so many different ways, from the obvious ones like the medical and science faculties to the philosophers to even English literature recommending books to read in lockdown. We were able to tap into our psychology expertise, and we published 63 stories between March and when we came back to work at the end of July. And it's really raised a lot of people's profiles because we were matching the expertise with this extraordinary health crisis, and people were hungry for information, and particularly information they could trust. With the advent of fake news, you people are in such a unique position to be authoritative commentators, to be evidence-based experts in the media. People are hungry for authoritative, credible information. in these extraordinary days of the pandemic and beyond. So it's very exciting to match what you know and your findings and your research results with the news cycle of the day. And it's been a real privilege for me to build this platform into something meaningful for all of you. So our first expert, who is vastly experienced, Professor Leslie Hughes. I'm sure she's known to all of you. She's a star media performer, and I couldn't obviously tell her anything she doesn't already know. I'll give you a quick rundown for those of you who aren't aware of her background. Professor Leslie Hughes is a distinguished professor of biology and Pro-Vice Chancellor, Research, Integrity and Development at Macquarie. She's an ecologist by training. Her research mainly focuses on the impacts of climate change on species and ecosystems. Leslie is a leading figure in international climate change research and communication. She's a passionate public communicator who believes in active engagement with policymakers and the wider community. Her role in communicating climate change science in accessible ways that can reach and be understood by a wide audience gained her the Eureka Prize for promoting understanding of Australian science in 2014. In 2019, she received the Australia Museum Research Institute Lifetime Achievement Award. Wow, that's exciting. She has contributed pieces to The Conversation and The Monthly and is frequently called on for her expert comment and interview skills by a diverse range of mainstream news outlets, from the ABC to Marie Claire. And she worked with us at the Lighthouse on a vox pop that we put together, I think, for International Women's Day, Professor Hughes, on how to get more women into science careers. So I think today she is going to be focusing on her piece in The Monthly. And I guess I'll start by asking you, Professor, what are some of the diverse ways that your media engagement has come about?
Well, thanks, Angie. I think I'm probably a bit different from most of the other people on the panel, and probably a bit different from what most of the ECRs are aimed at doing, at least now, which is to publicise their research, you know, in that sort of proactive way. So I'll leave others to comment more on the proactive side of media engagement. Most of my media engagement, especially over the last 10 years, has been very much on the reactive side. As people will appreciate, people who are working in the climate change area and who are willing to talk to the media are actually somewhat few and far between, I have to say, and there's some obvious reasons for that. It can be a pretty brutal and combative relationship sometimes. It's a very, very political topic. And so most of my, I would say probably 99% of my media interviews at one point or another have a political edge to them, and not everybody is comfortable about that. And I've certainly gained more comfort over the years as I've become experienced. A lot of my media engagement doesn't come through the university at all. It comes through my other roles, particularly with the formerly the Climate Commission of Australia and now the Climate Council. Both of those organisations have professional media and communications advisors and are always looking for opportunities to get people talking about climate change, especially climate science, into the media. So I think I would probably do, on average, at least 1 or 2 interviews a week. I probably looks like I do more because a lot of interviews get syndicated. You know, if you give an interview to the Herald, well, then, or the ABC especially, you know, it looks like you've given hundreds of interviews and you've actually given one, and they've been chopped and changed and delivered off to news outlets. So it's been a wild ride. I've had some really brutally horrible interviews. And I think if I had to give people advice, if they're in a sort of politically hot area, is that you can say no. You know, you don't have to accept every invitation if you're uncomfortable with the journalist or with the outlet, or anything. You can say no, you're under no obligation. It doesn't hurt to ask in advance what you're going to be asked about, and so you can prepare. The more prepared you are, the more you anticipate the questions, and usually in a political context that's pretty easy. People just like you to bash the government up, and I've often been happy to do that, so that's fine. But being prepared is really good. And the worst interviews I've have done, I think, was when I was complacent because I felt I was going to get an easy ride, for example, with an ABC journalist, and it proved to be the opposite. And in fact, some of the best interviews I've ever given, I think, were with right-wing skeptic shock jocks, because I was so fired up beforehand that I just sort of kind of ripped them to pieces because I had the adrenaline going. So sometimes the outcomes can be a bit different to what you might expect. But I'll stop there, and very happy to answer questions later. But I'll just sort of end by saying that most of my media has not been about publicising my own research. Very, very little, maybe 1%. Most of it has been in commentary and in promoting products, for example, that I have written through the Climate Council. So it's quite a different experience, I think, than some of the other people that will be on this panel.
Professor, you've raised some really good points, and it occurs to me to let everyone know that there's absolutely nothing stopping anyone asking for the questions in advance. If they want your expertise, you have every right to say, please send me the questions, and to interact with journalists after you've had a chance to digest the direction you feel like they want to take you in. And there's also nothing stopping you saying that you're not comfortable with this or that, and it's up to them, whether, particularly in a print interview, you don't have to answer the question if you don't like it. You can take it down another line like a politician does. Before I answer that, let me say this. And then make your point. Have your key messages figured out if you are wading into a polarising topic, as Professor Hughes has just described. I wouldn't mind knowing also your experience when you get passionate about your topic, which you obviously are. Has that amplified the coverage of your particularly passionate interviews more? Because often it will. If you get hot under the collar, then people want to click more and hear more and see the passion at work.
Yeah, look, I think if there's anything I've improved in, it's the soundbite issue. I think as a scientist, most of us want to give too much complex information. And I think if there's one thing that I've learned over time is that you do get your voice magnified if you've got a couple of catchy, short sound bites that are memorable. And I've certainly got a lot better at doing that over the years. I was also reflecting, I know Megan asked me to send some material, and I sent her a short clip of something a short interview I'd done on ABC Breakfast, which was about Tony Abbott and the Great Barrier Reef. And after rewatching that clip, I realised that when you can quote a few numbers, it actually gives you more credibility. Now, I'm hopeless at remembering numbers, but if you've just got a few numbers, especially if you're on the science side of things, if you've got those written down in front of you and you commit those to memory, I actually think it at least gives you the aura of knowing what you're talking about, rather than just kind of vague statements. So if you can come up with a few numbers, I think they instill confidence in your own self, and you don't have to remember them forever. You only have to remember them for a few minutes. But that's all part of being well prepared.
That's true. And I think live interviews such as ABC Breakfast, that's a very difficult and brutal task to take on, and you don't necessarily have to do that first off. You can always ask for a radio interview to be pre-recorded so you don't have to battle nerves. You can ask for questions to be emailed to you, and you can answer them in writing to the journalists. We often do that here. particularly in the business school where perhaps there's some complex monetary topics that need to be simplified, and to ensure accuracy also in scientific results, you can easily answer questions in writing.
So the other thing you can do, especially for print journalists, is to ask to see a copy of the copy before it gets put online or in the newspaper. And unless they're working to a really, really tight deadline, most journalists will do that anyway. And, you know, sometimes I've been able to just correct my own grammar, for example, so that I sound more competent. But yes, I mean, I think the thing to always remember is the journalist is after your expertise, and you choose how and when and how often and in what form you give that. So you should feel like you're in control, rather than necessarily feeling that you are a servant of the journalist. They actually need you more than you need them.
Absolutely, so, especially if 6 o'clock is approaching. Yes. Yeah. Yes, and look, to be honest, journalists don't want to get it wrong. I mean, everybody wants to get it right. They don't want to lose you as a contact for their next interview. If you are a subject matter expert in your field, they want to keep your number in their phones, and they don't want to get it wrong and upset you. So most journalists will send you their stories, especially if it's a complex topic. So don't be afraid to ask. It's good advice. Anyone got any questions for Professor Hughes? Not yet? All right. Well, our next expert is Vanessa Perotta. Dr. Perotta is a media star as well. She, when I first got here, very early on in my early days, she had a double-page spread. I think it might have even been across page 2 and 3 in the Herald. And I thought to myself, oh, I better chase this one up. She's got a great topic. She looks like a movie star, and she's very relaxed in front of the media. So she's got all those beautiful ingredients going on for coverage. And recently she's worked with us to make a spectacular video on her citizen science project, which has had, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hits on it in the last couple of weeks. And we made this video in a combination with footage she supplied us, and we also shot her in our video studio and stitched together a very engaging, visually powerful representation of her work in citizen science in a project she runs in south of Sydney with people counting whales. And it was a good news story right when we needed it. And that's one of the great big carrots that we can always dangle in, especially in the pandemic days. Good news really is a big seller. So Dr. Vanessa Perotta is a wildlife scientist and a science communicator. Her zoological background has taken her around the world for wildlife research. Vanessa is also a passionate and experienced science communicator who loves making science accessible. Her keen interests cover topics of science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, also known as STEAM. Vanessa has represented Australia internationally as the national winner of FameLab, which is a world-renowned science competition, communication competition, placing second in the world. Wow, that's fantastic. Vanessa's efforts to communicate science have also seen her become a TEDx speaker. She's spoken at the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and in 2019, she was recognised as one of the top 100 women of influence, judged by the Australian Financial Review. And she just recently appeared on Sunrise with our whale video and our beautiful citizen science story. So Vanessa, that's a stellar lineup of science communication. You've also done lots of media. So can you give us an example of all the different ways that the media have found you?
Well, thank you so much. That introduction is wonderful. There are a number of ways that the media has approached me. So I can remember early on as a master's student, this story is a really great one because it's so different to how I approach the media now. I was called up from Channel 7 to provide expert comment on a whale story of Cronulla. And at the time didn't think that I had the authority to talk about this thing. So I said, I'll just ask my supervisor. So by the time I waited for my supervisor to get back to me, it was maybe an hour, not too long, but in media time, that can be quite a long time. And then it turns out when I went back to the media to say, yeah, I'm okay to talk about this now, they had gone with someone who was not qualified, had absolutely no subject matter experience, and they ran with that story because that's what worked. Now, if given the opportunity to speak about my work, in addition to what Leslie was saying, my work is in media my work with the media has predominantly been promotional of my research, but now actually become into speaking as an expert on subject matter in the marine world. And so now if I'm asked to do something, I will take the chance to do it if the time permits. And so the media for me is something I view as a way of facilitating information rather than, oh, are they going to turn this story into something that it's not? And so recently I've diverged from talking about whales and the marine environment to now talking about sharks and being a more broad, diverse marine person. And I've since transitioned into a new role looking at wildlife trafficking with Taronga Zoo as well. So now my media skills are just going to be across a sweep of diverse topics regarding wildlife and conservation. So it's all about growing over time, and the experience with media doesn't just happen overnight. It takes time to work out what works best. And once you are on someone's books, so yes. Say you're a Channel 7's contact, breakfast, Leslie's on the probably ABC breakfast speed dial. Yes. It's great because once you show them that you can speak in front of the camera and you're professional about what you do, not dumb down things, but also speak with a bit of authority and know that you have an opportunity to speak about what you are asked to talk about, then that's a great thing. And so that's why these types of panels are such a great sweep of different levels of people doing different things in the media and how they actually came to be. And that's why it's just so timely, especially in COVID.
And Vanessa, have you got any advice on conquering nerves?
Yes. So the best advice I can give someone is, remember, you're being asked to speak to the media because you know something about what they want to know about. That's a really good point. They're not just asking anyone because it's convenient. They're probably asking you because you know something about what you're doing or something in your subject area. That's important. With that knowledge, that should give you the confidence to then go forward and ask questions. And I actually will ask questions beforehand to say, what is ABC going to talk to me about? What are the types of things they want to know? And that's okay to ask that. Also, I've asked to look at conversation pieces that I've written beforehand, pieces that go to print to say, can I just double check what we've written? And that's okay. And sometimes people are open about doing it and sometimes people aren't.
And that's great. What advice have you got about simplifying your research and the points you want to make so that they are easily understood by a non-scientific audience?
Great question. Make it simple that your 5-year-old nephew or child will be able to understand, or even your father who's a non-academic in my sense. So I will always explain things to him and go, do you get this? Make it simple. So I work on whale lung microbiota. To the average person, they probably forgot what that is. And so very famously, I talk about whale snot now because it's whales and it's snot. Two things come together. It's simple.
Yeah, because there's a difference between dumbing down and simplifying, isn't there?
Absolutely.
A lot of people are nervous that their life's work and their passion is going to be dumbed down, but it's not about that. It's about telling your amazing story to more people. And the more simply you do that, the more the media will come back to you.
Yeah, and also something to remember is that your funding may have come from public sources or government. And so it's actually an obligation for some, or it should be for many scientists, to be able to share their research if it's not sensitive. So if appropriate, being able to talk about your work and share it is actually a great thing to be doing with the permission to do so.
Yeah, and have you got any advice on anything that you might have done differently had you had the chance to go back?
Yes, sometimes in the past, I wanted to talk about a lot in one interview. And so, and I would always be like, oh, maybe they don't have enough time to talk to me. But now when I do an interview, I don't care how much time they have, they will cut me off when they want to cut me off.
True.
So I will just talk slow, just tell them what I want to talk about. And a great example was that with my recent, well, not too recent, but I spoke to Michael Rowlands on ABC Breakfast, and the flow between the conversation was one of my best interviews, because what I was talking about, he was generally interested, and he just went on to different tangents. There was things that we spoke about that I didn't even think we'd talk about, because it was a natural conversation, and that was what worked so well.
But you've got to a point where you can do that in a relaxed manner. I suppose if you're just starting out, you know, would you recommend having your key points written down and rehearsing them somewhat if you were heading into the TV cameras?
Absolutely. So maybe go in with 5 key points. What is that, the one-line sentence that you really want to say, what we've done, what are some of our findings, and what this might mean in the broader world. So learning about UV light on our skin will help us improve and then make it applicable to the everyday. So that person who might sweep through and see you on TV or hear you in the car for 2 minutes or so will be interested to stay in their car rather than get out and go inside their house, for example.
That's right. And in the media, we call that the so what factor. So why should we care in the nicest possible way about your findings? And that forces you to say, because it affects people's day-to-day life in X, Y, or Z ways. This is great for children because, or this will mean that if you go in the sun next time you're at the beach, you put it in a relatable situation.
Absolutely.
Although I don't know how we put whale snot into relatable situations.
Well, with that,
you've done very well with that.
Thank you. For my TEDx talk, I spoke about whales as these ecosystem engineer monitors. So they swim in the same water as we swim in, and they breathe the same air that we breathe, and they're allowing us to connect with the ocean across geographical areas to tell us more about the ocean, kind of like a canary in the coal mine for us. And so that's how I made that connection.
Amazing. That was really clever.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. It's always lovely to work with you, and I hope we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone do we want to leave the questions to the end, or do we want to have any questions now, Megan?
We might leave the questions to the end. There are some questions coming through and they're really good, but they might actually be applicable to quite a few people in the panel. So let's leave them to the end, but everyone keep your questions coming through.
Okay, moving on. Dr. Sarah Keith, who unfortunately I haven't met. I can't see you up there yet on the cameras yet either, Sarah, but hopefully it won't be long, because I see you have a fantastic topic that everybody loves to talk about. This is a really big growing area of interest. Dr. Sarah Keith, there you are. Hi.
Hello.
Is a senior lecturer in the Department of Media, Music, Communications and Cultural Studies. She's taught in areas including music production, radio production, digital media and music technology and performance over a decade. She currently convenes units in music, production and digital media. Her research areas include K-pop, Korean popular culture and East Asian popular music, as well as the Australian music industries, music and cultural policy, music and screen media, including documentary film and games, and music technology. So very media friendly topics there. Lots of opportunity to be a commentator and to buy into all sorts of discussions there, Sarah. What would you say was your most memorable interview?
Well, I'd like to spotlight my first, what I'd say was my first major interview, which was one that I did last year in August 2019 for the music show on ABC Radio National. So this is tying into K-pop as my research area, which I've been involved with since about 2013. And it really is a very media-friendly topic. What attracted me to K-pop as a researcher is the same thing that draws media attention to it. it's instantly appealing. It resonates with young people that are already fans, but it's also fascinating to people who have very little knowledge of it. But of course, it's also a lens through which we can examine really interesting and important topics like globalization, the music and media industries, or Australia's relationship with East Asia. So like Leslie, my engagement with media around this topic is more serendipitous than strategic. And I was approached directly for comment by the ABC. And my first experience, like I said, was the music show for ABC Radio National, but I've since been approached again by the ABC, by SBS, as well as a couple of overseas outlets. So I really think it's also a matter of being in an area which is of public interest, or at least knowing how to make it of public interest. Also, I just want to say, I had the good fortune to attend a workshop many years ago that was on media engagement that was run by Macquarie. So when I was doing my first interview, I referred back to my notes from that, which was incredibly helpful. So I just want to acknowledge the great resource that you're providing here, Angie.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Michael will talk to us more about that in a moment. He does a stellar job at training with his vast experience and helping people hone their messages. So he'll be coming up very soon. So in an area like K-pop, we have published one story with one of your colleagues, and it was an instant hit because it is so appealing. It gives you, I guess, an opportunity to marry academic expertise with a more relaxed, informal kind of interview style because of the subject area, because we're talking about things that make people feel happy and the beautiful, bright and colourful K-pop, happy news. I suppose you were able to just be a little bit more relaxed about not having to remember numbers or findings. It's more commentary, I suppose, that you're giving, yeah?
Well, for this particular show, it was the music show, which is a radio show that runs on Sunday morning. So for this particular piece, it was really a case of a primer or an introduction to the area, a very sort of a gentle introduction, if you like. So that was clear to me when they pitched the piece to me. They were saying that they really wanted a broad introduction to the field. So based on this, I did a few things. The first thing was to really work with the producer of the show to find out exactly what they wanted. They gave me a short brief, which was they wanted an explainer around the genre. Following up from that, they asked me whether I had any examples that I should, that they should play on the show. So I provided that to them. And that was that was the start of a dialogue that I started up with the producers, which really helped me prepare for the interview and to know what they wanted out of it. So once I'd sent her my list of songs that I thought she should feature on the show, she sent me back a agenda for the discussion, which in turn helped me to prepare my answers. And although it was a sort of very friendly, gentle interview, I still did want to have information at my fingertips about what year the song came out, or what year this happened, or just extra information that helped me feel more prepared and give a more professional sounding interview. Even though it may not have been strictly necessary for the message, I did like to have that degree of correctness in my preparation. So that made me sound more precise. It was pre-recorded, but it was start to finish with no editing. So it was sort of as live, but it didn't go out live.
And did you go into the studio or did you do it over the phone?
I went into the studio. So it was me, Andrew Ford, the interviewer or the host, and Andy True, who was another panelist. So there was three of us, and it was in the form of a conversation between Andrew and Andy and I. And he was kind of playing the part of the listener, if you like, asking us probing questions, very gentle questions about, and why is it like this? Or what are some of the important artists in this area, and that sort of thing.
And did they make an effort to make you feel comfortable in the environment and help you with the equipment and all of those things that could be a little bit intimidating if you've never seen it before?
Yeah, absolutely. They really bent over backwards to make me and the other panelists feel at ease. I suppose it might be different for other media outlets, but for this particular show, it was really about a comfortable discussion and not an antagonistic one at all. So I had, of course, spent a lot of time putting together responses and notes and little sound bites and stories that I wanted to tell. And I put a lot of time into trying to remember them. And then at the 11th hour, I found that I could bring my iPad in with me. So that was another very helpful thing. Probably not always the case, especially if you're doing a television interview. But that was a big help for this particular one. And they were totally fine with me referring to my notes as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
And what impact do you think that opportunity had on your profile?
Well, it's very difficult to know exactly, but it was really my first major media exposure, and I've had 6 since in the year, and I think that really sparked off me establishing a presence as a commentator in this area. So it's been really useful. Like I said, I was contacted by the ABC again for a television interview on ABC News 24, as well as SBS. So it has led to other things, but I've never explicitly known why people get in contact with me. I assume that it's based on my research track record and simply my researchers .mq profile, because I'm not really a enthusiastic social media user. I would say that it's based on your research output. And for many kinds of shows, it is the research output that they want, because they want an expert comment. They want someone who has an established research track record in the area. So yeah, that's my experience with the show.
Yeah, it's always helps to have, timing is everything, that your particular topic has enjoyed the spotlight of late in the last year or two. It's, had a real surge of popularity, hasn't it? And even at Macquarie, I'm told that it's being studied in your department, isn't it? In the language department, I think there's a move to introduce Korean into curriculum because it's become so popular.
Yes, that's the story in many universities.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I got in touch with the Korean newspaper, and when we published our K-pop story, much the same as you, explaining the phenomenon and who the key players were in K-pop and how Australian kids were all signing up to learn Korean because they wanted to engage more deeply with this trend. And so I got in touch with a Korean newspaper who put our Lighthouse story on their Facebook page.
Oh, wow.
And we just had it was just so fun to watch the numbers climb.
Absolutely.
Over that 24 hours. I think we got into the 10,000 page views because it was, such a hot topic at the time.
Yeah.
So it always helps if your research taps into a trend or something that's, even in an underground way among teenagers, a thing. Yeah. Well, I'll be getting in touch with you, Sarah.
Yeah, no worries.
To see if we can work up another story and get another 10,000 hits. Well, thank you so much for your experiences. Monica Wren, I'm sorry I haven't met you yet either. I can't see you up there. Monica, are you there?
Yeah.
Hello, hi. I love your background.
Thank you. That's from my garden.
It's very spring for today.
Yeah.
For those of you who are not familiar with Monica's research, Dr. Monica Wren is a China business expert. Her core research interests are in the global strategy and firms' internationalization strategies, especially foreign direct investment and business. Help me, Monica. GUANXI.
Sorry?
Tell me how to say this. GUANXI.
GUGUN. 关系. Yeah. 关系. Yeah, relationship. Yeah.
Networks and institutional studies. Monica is a lecturer in international business strategies and marketing in the Macquarie Business School. She's a scholar, a creative thinker with an entrepreneurial spirit and a mindfulness practitioner. Gosh, I might come to your door later. Her piece for the conversation, Beyond Travel, a Trans-Tasman Bubble, is an opportunity for Australia and New Zealand to reduce dependence on China, was picked up first by an industry news website of the Australian Manufacturing Forum, and from there by mainstream news outlets, including the Australian and the ABC and the South China Morning Post. Wow. And this raises another good point, that getting your media coverage into trade press or to industry Bibles can often be a launching pad into the mainstream media. They've got enormous value. Science reporters all keep an eye on the science Bibles, as do the marketing, as do the finance journalists, all keep an eye on what the people in that field read and where they get their news. And so that can be a really great trigger and platform for further coverage. And often it's worth targeting first so that you can start a cascade into the mainstream media. So, Monica, of late your topic, I suppose, strays into what Leslie was describing as political and a little bit polarising. And have you had to face any kind of, combative interviews yourself?
Yeah, very good question. When Leslie was mentioning about that, I was smiling.
Oh, right. What's been
I actually had a very interesting conversation with Michael back in, I guess, April, when the China and Australian relationship started to have that sort of unexpected tension. You know, the Bali put on tariffs and all of that as the background noises. And I got an additional radio invitation that I sent to Michael straight away, and we had a quick discussion that Michael gave me some very valuable advice at that time. He said, you don't want what you said to be quoted by the media, during this very sensitive time, which I was struggling, because I'm not so experienced dealing with radio and the media. I respect his professional advice, and that gave me the great confidence to say no to the media, because that was just after my first radio interview, and that was supposed to be the second, and I said no. And thanks to Michael again for that.
Yeah, that was great advice. And as we'll hear later on, Michael has lived in Hong Kong and knows South China Morning Post very well, and worked as a journalist in Hong Kong. So he was in a unique position to give you that good advice. How did your first interview go, though, prior to the one that you said no to?
Oh, yeah. So the first one was with the ABC network for the morning program on the 6PR radio. That was live, and it was my first media radio interview. I think it happened in early May this year. What I did was I had several phone calls with Michael. We actually ran through some rehearsal, and also had Michael asked me a few questions, which I was not giving some sort of specific examples. So he asked me some examples, say, can you make that really short and be easy to be captured? So I made some preparation based on his advice. And that was exactly the question they asked.
Oh, fantastic. That was great.
It was really interesting. And I thank to Michael again for the great support. He was actually on air listening to my video interview and at the same time. And I got a phone call right away after my interview from Michael saying, hey, you did very well.
Oh, fantastic. Were you nervous, Monica?
I was okay because I had I worked in industry before, became prior to my academic life. So I was the marketing director, and I had to deal with media. I had some experience there, but as academic, this was the first radio interview that I had on a relatively sensitive topic.
Yes, yes. And do you feel as though it's given you confidence to do more, even though you chose to say no the next time the opportunity came? Have you had a chance to reflect since that interview and sort out your thoughts on, you know, being a bit braver to take on something a little bit controversial next time in the interests of getting your message out there?
Yeah, I think it depends. I didn't think that was not brave, to be honest. I just thought that because my research topics are really on the U.S.-China trade war since a couple of years ago, and it's, you know, it's tangled with lots of political issue, and we got to be really careful about you know, our public influence in terms of what sort of information or messages that we try to send out. To be honest, you know, this geopolitical tension happened too rapidly. Even our thoughts and the frameworks have been modified so many times. And I'm not only responsible to my thoughts, I'm also responsible to make a safeguard to be able to transmit the appropriate information to the public and the practitioners on behalf of my research team.
Yeah, I suppose that raises a good point. Your media training with Michael that you've talked about will give you an opportunity to also practice things to say when you don't want to answer the question. If they're trying to drag you into an area that you're not comfortable in, and such as dragging you into some sort of news story of the day that's a political football, you can practice ways of diverting that conversation back to where you want it to be. And that's the value of media training that Michael will speak more about in a minute. What do you feel, what advice would you have for other people just starting out in this endeavour of speaking about your expertise on the media?
Yeah, I think we can go by incremental steps. So maybe as researchers or scholars, we may be feeling more comfortable to have deal with printed media. So you have the room to, you know, rephrase it and reevaluate. That's what we have been doing with our pieces on conversations on different media outlets in writing pieces. And obviously we don't have that much buffering zone if we're dealing directly with radios or even TV shows. You know, you are more upfront there. I think, you know, as we trend or gain more experiences through this process, it might be a good strategy to make yourself more comfortable.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah, absolutely agree with that, that print media or online news stories, which can always be edited and corrected, don't forget, is a gentler way of starting your engagement with the media than under hot lights or on live radio. So thank you so much for those insights, Monica.
Thank you.
And I'd love to get in touch with you later on and find out more about your research.
Thank you.
So last of our scholars is Rowan Best on the panel. Rowan, you've engaged with us with a great story in your expertise on the Lighthouse, on a story on solar energy making its way into the rental market. I will let everyone know, if they're not familiar with your work, Dr. Rowan Best is an economist at Macquarie. He's a lecturer in the Department of Economics and a member of the Centre for Workforce Futures. That's a really popular place. We've had a lot of engagement with media through that centre, and the Centre for Corporate Sustainability and Environmental Finance. His research and teaching focuses on energy, another very hot topic, the environment and developing countries. He is also an ECR faculty representative for the Macquarie Business School. Rowan, you're just starting on your journey with media engagement too, but you have co-authored articles in the Conversation as well as the Lighthouse. His recent research paper on the positive impact of carbon pricing on emissions reductions, which was promoted through us, led to additional media engagements, including being asked to provide expert commentary in an SBS article. The study was also picked up and highlighted in the Sydney Morning Herald. Again, like Leslie, a very sexy topic that is always of interest to journalists. There's always great opportunity to put your argument forward in an ongoing debate. With those experiences, Rowan, how did you find the path from a very controlled and friendly experience with the Lighthouse to then moving on to the mainstream media? What were the differences for you in engaging with us through Michael to come up with an article that had media value to then making that leap to mainstream?
Yeah, thanks, Angie, and thanks, Michael, as well. So yeah, the experience with the Lighthouse was great, and I think that helps a lot. But yeah, as you mentioned, the external media, I found that it happened a lot quicker. So for the SBS article, they sort of called up, and I was doing a phone interview just not long after, and I wasn't sort of as prepared perhaps as I could have been. So that was probably the key difference that I noticed there. But it seemed to vary quite a lot. The SBS article didn't have a lot of collaboration, but the Sydney Morning Herald article was very collaborative. The editor, the journalist, pretty much worked collaboratively with one of the other co-authors on the research article. So yeah, it seemed to vary quite a lot, just based on which journalist.
Yeah. Did you find yourself, asking for, clarification, and could you see what they were planning to write first? Did you take that leap?
I didn't. I think that's one thing I do differently, particularly with the SBS article, because I guess I don't have that kind of natural sort of talent. And like some of my sentences were okay, some of them weren't so good, and they ended up choosing one of the ones that wasn't all that good.
Well, that was a bit mean. They should have rewritten it for you.
Yeah, I guess I could have been more proactive, I think, in that respect.
I think, when you get to know, if you have further engagements with particular journalists and you form relationships with people who are interested in your topic area, you can then, become more relaxed and ask for more input in what they're going to do. I mean, obviously in your first experience, that's quite an intimidating thing to do. But as you form relationships, you're perfectly entitled to say, can you just show me the quotes? Because the spoken word is so different to when you see it in writing. A sentence that's perfectly fine on radio perhaps doesn't work so well in print because it's conversational. So, don't be afraid to ask. Sometimes in my day, we would ask to see the quotes, and I would always happily send back the quotes to the person that I've interviewed, perhaps not the whole story. Some people might still say no to that, but you're perfectly within your rights to ask for the quotes that you've given so that you can clean up some of the little things that make you cringe when you see it in writing. And so would you be inclined to, put more energy into going down this path, pardon the pun? Do you want to do this more, Rowan? Can you see the impact? Yeah,
I think it does have a lot of benefits. I guess one strategy is kind of partnering with people who are better at it. Like in my case, the other two authors were much more experienced and also much better at media engagement as well. So I guess that can be a way to sort of get a bit of contributor in a small way, even if you're not the best at it yourself like me, but you can still contribute as a part of a team kind of thing.
Yeah, and what were some of the things you learned from those co-authors?
Well, I guess the first thing that came to mind is it was very widely promoted, like the main author sent it to journalists, to politicians, government departments, intergovernment departments. It was pretty much went very widely. So heavy promotion was one thing. But yeah, I guess just relationship development. This author, he pretty much seemed like, you know, knows everyone in Australia, and he's already got these relationships set up.
But you can form them very easily if you have an engaging headline on your story, or if you have an expert reaction, as Leslie was saying, to news of the day. If you read the newspapers and hear the radio in the car on the way into work, and you hear something being talked about that speaks to your expertise, and you're really busting to buy into that debate, trust me, they will eat up the expert commentary. Journalists are looking for people like you to come to them with something, you know, meaningful to say. You know, don't forget, with this ever-changing hungry beast, especially on things like the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald websites, they're constantly renewing their content, and, you know, it's just refreshing every few hours, and they're looking for more and more new content all the time, hungry for experts to buy into something that's out there in the wider conversation of the day. And you could easily find yourself, you know, prompting a whole story if you call and say, I've got something to say about this, especially if it's controversial. If you're comfortable with taking the opposing view or saying something slightly controversial, that will pretty much guarantee that a journalist will love you and put your number in their phone. If you're prepared to, you know, really say some quotable quotes. Is there anything that you would like to advise your fellow newbies, Rowan?
Yeah, I guess just maybe try to ask for help and try to, you know, speak to people who've got more experience, and maybe even choose topics which you think are kind of going to be, as you mentioned, the media will be interested in. Yeah.
Well, I'll be looking forward to getting in touch to see what you're working on soon, to start the process again with you.
That'd be great.
Thanks very much. That was a great success, that story, Rowan. And Michael, our last but not least expert. Michael is a long-time finance journalist who looks after the business school content and external affairs, and he's one of my main contributors to the Lighthouse. He's a subject matter expert in business. You know, I'm not going to pretend that I can deconstruct climate theory or monetary theory in a meaningful way, and I rely very much on Michael to simplify and make the often complex business information digestible to the general public. He is a long-time journalist, news editor at the Wall Street Journal in Hong Kong, as I mentioned before, for many years, and ran the companies section at the Australian Financial Review in Sydney. Michael has also worked as a corporate communications professional as the Asia Pacific Head of External Affairs at insurer AIG, and he was the Senior Media Strategist at Edelman Public Relations. So vastly experienced in both sides of the fence, helping people get their message out to the world, and also being the journalist himself. So I'm going to hand over to Michael to tell us, what does it take? Here's the $64,000 question. What does it take to get the media interested in academic research?
Yes, well, thanks Angie. Firstly, I've got to say how impressed I am at how polished and professional the members of the panel are, and I think they potentially could do us out of a job, Angie. You're all very good.
Yeah, they won't need us soon.
You're all very good, and thank you for engaging with us. Look, I think at a very superficial level, the day-to-day newsroom is a very high-stress sort of pressure cooker type of situation, and you see that just by watching the news every night on your television or online. But news needs to basically be relevant, timely and topical. And Angie mentioned it needs to have so what factor, and probably something that taps into a trend or something that's going on in the world, and then they'll come looking for you. So I pulled together a little slide here that we did, pulling together some work that Abbas Mazai from the Department of Marketing did following a Lighthouse piece he wrote regarding woke marketing, in particular the support given to the Black Lives Matter movement by big corporates. So he wrote a Lighthouse piece about how household brands are sort of going beyond functional benefits of their products and was showing a more meaningful and compassionate side to their corporate image. So companies like Reebok, Nike, Twitter, Cotton On started expressing solidarity with people of color. And so media wanted someone to comment on that. So as a result of the one Lighthouse article, which we turned around very quickly, he was subsequently asked to write other opinion pieces, and was also then interviewed by SBS, the Herald, the ABC, several trade publications, and it just snowballed. And I was just doing them again initially yesterday. He's been asked to write yet another column. He's been approached as a result of all that coverage to be a speaker on a couple of webinars, to appear on expert panels and the like. So look, in this instance, Abbas was sought for his expertise and commentary, as many of you would be or are be. It wasn't for a specific bit of research, but it was for his experience researching this field that gave him the credibility and allowed him to sort of speak with a great deal of authority on this topic. And if I could just talk about something that Monica Wren talked about earlier, which was about tapping into a trend or something going on in the world. She had written a piece about a trans-Tasman trade bubble, a few months ago. Now that particular article appeared at the same time that the government was talking about a trans-Tasman travel bubble. So the language, it was just pure coincidence, serendipitous, but the language was the same, and the media just sort of caught on to it. And they thought, well, this is another angle on something that's being spoken about at the federal level. Let's see what she has to say. So she was initially, I think, if I'm not wrong, I think it was 6PR, which is the highest rating AM station in Perth. It's kind of like 3AW or TGB. It was morning breakfast, so it was kind of prime time. And we just sort of, we talked through the potential questions and just the potential pitfalls as well. But that was kind of how that would have come about, looking at it from a journalist perspective. It was just that use of that word trans-Tasman and bubble that basically that got their interest. So yeah, if there's any questions on that.
Michael, is it also about being prepared to re-navigate your expertise, to sort of remold what you know into the news of the day, to workshop an angle, as you say? Do you want to explain what you mean by an angle to our audience?
Yeah, well, so an angle is it's a journalistic bit of jargon, and often when you're writing for Lighthouse, Angie or I will actually say to you, we need an angle, which is basically a news hook. So when you're writing your academic papers, you write a very compelling piece, and then you sort of eventually sum it all up in a conclusion, which you obviously sometimes then include in the abstract at the beginning. For journalists, the angle is basically all that matters, because that's what's going to get people interested in the story. That's what's going to get the viewers to stay tuned in, and so forth. So, you have done all this very extensive research. There's one particular finding that journalists know just inherently that's the newsiest thing about what you've done. You may not agree with that. And that's so sometimes you have to be careful when you do go into a media interview that you don't give them too many key points, because if you give the journalist too many key points, they may focus on the one that you think is the least interesting. and ignore your other ones. So you just got to be kind of mindful of that sort of thing as well when you do go into an interview. But it's basically the news hook. It's basically, and you know, we'll help you with that. Each faculty has a communications partner, like a media advisor as such, who you can reach out to and sort of talk about the research that you have, that you'd like to potentially give us some sort of coverage, or perhaps write a Lighthouse story off it. And then that particular communications advisor will, you know, talk to Angie and then, you know, workshop some kind of story up on that. And then from there, it gets leveraged and gets publicized and promoted out through a media blast, an email blast rather, or we act proactively, you know, harass journalists and say, there's a bit of research you might be interested in following.
So more on the angle, Michael, I often say to academics who I meet with that when you sit down to write a scholarly article, if you think of it as a triangle with a preamble, and as Michael said, you make your point right in the last paragraph. If you're writing for media, it's an inverted pyramid. It is the reverse of that. You put all your main points in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and then diminishing importance as we go on. And that taps into the clickability of what you've got to say. That's also a reflection of, I think we have, I don't know, 8 to 10 seconds to get people reading. I mean, rarely do people read on the media all the way to the bottom. People are on their phones, people are on the train. You have to put all of your key points in the top front load of the story. So very, very different to your academic writing, and it's probably takes a bit of practice to get used to that. Michael, what sort of opportunities would you say that the COVID crisis brought for academic coverage at Macquarie and particularly the business school?
Well, look, as it turns out, COVID turned out to be quite a busy time for the business school, and along with sort of medicine and health sciences. You know, the challenge for me was to find corona-related angles in the academics research. And this wasn't easy as the pandemic was new and no research had been conducted. And so, you know, what I did and what I'm doing 6 months into this is looking for academics to pitch out as expert commentators to try and reverse engineer their already published research or areas of expertise into the sort of COVID narrative. So let me give you some examples. There's quite a few stories here where we had incredible success in terms of viewers, readers clicking on. The first story about panic buying by Prashan, who's in the Department of Actuarial Studies and Business Analytics. He really tapped into the zeitgeist around the supermarket rush during COVID early on. So he just talked about this, the economics behind it, a little bit about the psychology behind it, why people behave in a certain way, but with an economic bent. That story, I think, got over 10,000 page views, which is massive for a business story. It was republished in Retail Trades. He's been quoted as an expert commentator and asked to participate in virtual conferences and the like. The piece up on the right there by Debbie Husky-Leventhal, which was 77 positive outcomes of COVID. Again, 21,000 Lighthouse views. Story was republished in Israel, South Africa, the United States.
Paris.
She just put a positive spin on the good things that have come out of COVID. You know, greater engagement with family, people taking time out to exercise, a relook at work-life balance situation. So that stories like that just gained great traction. Yvette Blount, who writes a lot, again, from the Centre of Workforce Futures. She writes a lot about working from home or working remotely. So I talked to her about what can we do around this now that everybody's working from home. So she sort of pulled together a piece on how, you know, what managers can do to make, you know, working from home suitable for employees and to support them and while still supporting business and staff morale. So again, she was called up on Sunrise and Sky and the like, and this article was also republished. And finally, the John Selby piece talked about the downside of a cashless society. This was when, again, looking for stories, and the trend was that everyone was going cashless. He came up with a contrarian view on that totally removing cash is not a great thing, various security reasons and the like. And again, this story was reprinted several times and now is still being sought for comment, on that topic. So, as an expert commentator, you've got to be, relevant and responsive and reachable. And, as Vanessa pointed out earlier on, you need to make yourself, available when the journalists see your research. And in some instances, you really got to make yourself available almost immediately, because they just want to get a couple of comments from you off the phone and file their story. So, there's just a few examples of what we've been doing anyway.
And Michael, can you explain to everyone what kind of support is available through our comms team for them if they want to engage with us and start their media journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned, every faculty has a communications partner or a media advisor assigned to the faculty. We can get the names of those people to everyone later on. And that's your best first point of call, is to engage with them. If you've got some research, you want to promote it, you want to write for Angie on the Lighthouse, best go through those individuals and they'll take you through the process. We have quite a few freelance writers on staff as well who we use to, write these pieces. A lot of them are, like Angie and I, sort of former Fairfax refugees. So they write in a very nice light style, and they make your story and your research accessible to a wider audience.
That's the thing also, that if you feel that you would rather be interviewed by one of our writers and they can write that piece in your voice and send it back to you for you to make tweaks or corrections or change direction, but they can start the process for you and be a ghostwriter if you feel as though that's going to help you learn the style for your first time out. We can certainly organise that. There's also an opportunity, if you don't want it to be in the first person, we can get one of our writers to interview you in a news style, again, to send straight back for you. We would never publish anything if it didn't have your tick of approval first. And even if you know that you've got something to say and you're not quite sure how to make that into a news angle, you can back and forth with Michael or I or any of our writers to help you hone that news angle. So we're really there as a support structure. You don't have to sit there wondering how to do it yourself. Michael also is available for media training, and the arrangements for that can be sent around as well. If you would like to do a practice interview, we can arrange that too. We can do that formally or informally, as we heard with Monica. Michael just ran through what he knew would be the questions on the phone to her, and it turned out that he was spot on. And, we can do that for you anytime as well. Michael?
There's quite a few questions. I'm just wondering whether we should...
Okay, let's move on, because we have, I think, gone a bit over time. So I might hand back to you.
Thanks, Angie. Yeah, we do have some great, that's been some great discussion and initial everything's finding out about, what everyone's engagement with the media, what they've used it for, or how they've been approached has been really interesting. So thank you everyone from the panel. Okay, so we're just going to move through the chat and hopefully we'll get through all the questions. So the first one is, how do you keep yourself from overstating your results, especially when journalists try to corner you?
Michael, you want to take that one?
How do you do what, sorry?
How do you stop yourself from overstating your results? And in particular, when journalists are trying to corner you?
Oh, look, in these instances, apart from something that's a hot button issue like, climate change, you'll find the journalists just want you for commentary. That's that. So I mean, academics are in a really great position because you're seen as non-biased. You've got, you know, authoritative research. You stick to the facts, and journalists love that. You're not trying to sell a product other than your research. But you're not. It's not like talking to someone who works in, you know, financial services who's plugging, you know, their financial product. So you'll find that most of the time journalists will only come to you because they want clarity on an issue, they want a viewpoint, or they want a contrarian viewpoint, and then they'll move on. It's very unlikely they're going to try and trap you into anything. But if you do have those kind of concerns, you obviously should let, you know, your media advisor and your faculty know, because the chances are we know the journalists or we know of them, and we can sort of give you some sort of guidance on, you know, how to engage or whether to even engage with a particular individual.
That's true. And another thing to remember is that if you work out your key messages and just stick to those and keep repeating those, you don't allow yourself to be cornered.
You can decline answering the question. It's not a court of law. You know,
yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not the right person to speak to that, you know, and let them go talk to someone else.
It's just a matter of understanding that, you know, you're in control of that communication process. That somebody else said today that I think it was Professor Hughes, you know, you're in the driver's seat. You take control of that. And if you don't want to answer the question, just keep saying what your findings are.
Great. Okay, so this is a couple of questions grouped together because they're very similar. So really, this is coming from, I think, some of the ECRs who have never had any media engagement. How do you initiate that first engagement? Are there ways to approach a particular journalist? How did some of the other ECRs on the panel get actually found as well? Like,
I saw quite a few questions popping up along this line. So I think afterwards, Megan, we'll give you the names of the different faculty advisors, and you can circulate it. But that's probably your best point of call, is engage with those people and take it from there. I mean, if you're active on social media, I just see a question pop up about social media. There's no harm in, you know, tweeting your research or any wry observations that you have on a particular issue, and then basically tagging the various TV networks, or if you happen to have a relation with the reporter, the actual reporter, so that they see it. So, you know, there's one particular academic in the business school who's very prolific on Twitter, and that's exactly what she does. She hashtags, you know,
yeah, Jan about it
today, and she hashtags 7 News and the rest of it.
Also, I'll explain our promotion ecosystem on the Lighthouse. Once we publish a story, then I will send out a subscriber email. We've got 1,500 followers and 93 of those are journalists. And so I will choose something strategically to put in that subscriber email that I know taps into the zeitgeist, or that's really good news, or that's world first findings. And that email often triggers journalists getting in touch. I've got my email on the bottom of that subscriber email, and I will get media requests if they like the way we've spun that story that day. We also promote on the university's social channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Facebook has 900,000 followers at Macquarie's account, and it's an enormously successful account. And so a lot of journalists follow us on our channels, and they will find us through those. And thirdly, we actively pitch. We have an external media agency who helps us. I pitch personally to people I know personally, and also people who I know are in jobs that are going to be interested in the subject matter that we're trying to promote. I personally email people. Our media agency also blitzes media alerts when we have things that are really interesting findings, like the Itner brothers in the medical faculty recently had some world first dementia research, which just went everywhere. They did, you know, dozens of interviews, and the promotional ecosystem worked really well on that story. Because it was a world first, it was always going to get coverage, but because it's dementia, it touches people's emotions, and so many people obviously know people with dementia in their families. But we've got a strategy and a well-oiled machine that we enact daily to promote the story of the day. So we're here to help journalists find out about you.
Angie, could I also just mention that the conversation is a great way of getting your research picked up. So if you can get something into the conversation, and of course there is a bit of an art as to how to pitch, and I'm sure you'd be able to help people. But I've certainly noticed that ABC journalists in particular use the conversation to drive pieces, often on the weekend. So they'll pick up conversation pieces during the week, and that will form the basis when it's a bit quiet on the weekend, politically or otherwise, to do sort of longer stories. And writing for the conversation is also a fantastic discipline about writing clearly and concisely. It's a limited space. They have an algorithm of readability, which you have to pass before it gets published. And I've just noticed that the pickup of those stories is really good.
That's absolutely true. And I've got an example from this week, Leslie, on demonstrating the success of that strategy. I called, the conversation is full of ex-Fairfax journalists as the media landscape shrinks, sadly. I called them up because I knew I had a piece from a historian. Matthew Bailey is a retail historian in the Faculty of Arts. He has commented on shopping wars before, and he got in touch with me saying, I want to say something about the COVID battle between landlords and retailers. And I said to him, great, how quickly can you write that? He wrote it overnight. By 10 a.m. I was on the phone to the deputy editor at The Conversation, offering him a co-publishing deal. I said to him, if you can have this piece, but I'll wait for you to do your thing and we can publish it at the same time. And so he put the Lighthouse link to our platform on the bottom of his, and I put his on the bottom of ours. So it was a cross-promotional success story. And within 24 hours, that piece had been read 20,000 times. And when I looked this morning, it was 51,000 times. So that's something that, as you're right, Leslie, they're tough nuts to crack, but we've done it a couple of times, especially if the topic is sexy and newsworthy. And I mean, Matthew's beside himself. He's so happy. It's had reads all over the world. They helped him make it readable. I got it over the line, and it was a great success story. So I can always, give that a crack for anything anyone wants to say. And I'd love to engage more with them on your behalf, because it skirts, I can short circuit the usual process of trying to go into a queue and get someone to read your piece. Because I've got a few relationships there where they know that I'm a former colleague, and I can get onto a person on the phone and say, look, I've got something that you're going to really like today. And it was great. That was a big thrill for me last week. So I'm more than happy to do that more if you feel that you can write something very, very quickly.
Okay, we might have time for one more question. So I'm going to pick this one, which is going to the panelists, and probably Leslie and Sarah particularly. Can you talk more around the benefits of being a more general commentator, talking in areas around your topic in terms of the benefits back to your research career? Now, I know, Leslie, you touched on it a little bit, but if perhaps you and Sarah and maybe even Vanessa, if you're broadening out, could talk about that.
I'll go first, Megan, because then I've got to rush to another meeting, I'm afraid. But yes, look, I've become a general commentator about all things climate change. And even though I'm an ecologist and that's where my research is, I've now, because of the Climate Council, written a lot about climate impacts on all sorts of things, from agriculture to tourism to just about anything. So over time, you do build up a sort of, I guess, some stock phrases and stock knowledge. It does require you to keep up with the literature, at least at some level. And believe me, in climate science, that's pretty hard. But I think, as Michael said before, if you do get asked a question where you're really floundering and you really have no idea, just say, well, that's not my expertise, but I'd like to say this. You know, so don't feel you have to answer every question. Just answer the questions that you actually feel comfortable that you've got something to contribute. But I think the onus is on you to be broadly well informed around your topic, and not too narrow. And that means you are better talent for a journalist.
Very true.
And my apologies, but I'm going to go. I'm hoping you can stay on and talk a little bit, but I'm going to need to go. But thank you so much, Angie, and everybody. Thanks, Megan, too.
Pleasure, and thank you.
I'll jump in after Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. The thing with how I've obviously come into the media with a particular area of expertise, but now I'm broadening out, which is great. So it's not just whale stories. Now I'm talking about the marine environment as a whole. For example, the shark attacks recently, that is something I've been talking about because I'm communicating as a science communicator, which I've put a link down on the side there, which has provided some top tips for science communication. Because essentially that's what you're doing as a scientist. You're communicating your work, you're making it more accessible. And so by showing the fact that I can talk about a subject and then also talk about others, I'm building on what I can talk about. And now moving into looking at illegal wildlife trafficking as a scientist, it's just going to keep broadening and broadening using my contacts that I've acquired as a marine scientist. So that's how it goes. And I'll also just want to point out, don't be afraid to contact journalists. Go on Twitter, send them a message. Hey, I'm doing this amazing research. Would you like to share it? Do that. They won't mind. They might take the bait. They might not even talk or get back to you at all. Don't be offended. They're busy people. Those are the kind of things that you ask a question, and you'll be amazed at where it will lead you.
And they will make a mental note of maybe contacting you later. Maybe it's not the story they're working on today, but they love to fill up their contact books with experts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to be incredibly rude because I have another meeting, but thank you so much for putting this on. Thank you so much, Angie and Megan.
Thank you.
And best of luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on what Vanessa was saying, I think the point about broadening what you can comment on is a really good one, because it just gives you more opportunities to talk about the other research you're doing. Although we're all specialists in one area, that doesn't mean we only have to comment on that one area, because as our careers evolve, we do broaden our research. And I recently did an interview in Sydney Morning Herald, which was nothing to do with K-pop. It was about the music industry more generally. So these opportunities do come along for you to diversify eventually.
Fantastic.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. It is 3:30 and I know everyone has busy schedules, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and Angie for moderating. It was a fabulous session. Just to let everyone know, we are working with the library who run this great session on how to build your online profile. We're just coordinating to work out a date for that, but it'll probably be late September, early October. So keep your eyes on the ECR newsletter or the ECR news, just what we circulate, and you'll hear about that. And finally, I will be circulating a survey around. If you can take 5 minutes to fill that out and let us know what you thought about this session. That would be great. Again, thank you so much for everyone for attending, and thank you to our panelists and moderator.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Afternoon.
Bye.